I have two questions, if it's all right, if we have time. For starter, I wanted to hear when you were looking at characterizing raw feeding for the hair tissue mineral analysis, when looking at like the fact that there was appropriate levels of zinc, etc., did you classify or stratify at all whether it would look like a somewhat complete and balanced approach to putting together a raw diet when looking at that, or was it all sort of put together?
It was sort of, we just asked in the questionnaire if the dog was eating raw food and how many % of the total diet. And we did ask more like details, but we just put them all together as raw in this study. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Because I'm just thinking, from Australia, where a lot of people that did home prepared raw would be thinking about adding an oyster or trying to use pepita seeds or something as a source of zinc. So kind of keen to know how the zinc, where the zinc was coming from in that diet. And then my second question might be for Alessandra or Robin. With the estrobolome and looking at different types of the dysbiosis and bioconversion of different types of estrogen, whether you guys are looking at all at the potential for single nucleotide polymorphisms for COMP genes and how 17 hydroxy estrogen in urine could be a marker in humans of potentially being an early detection system for breast cancer, whether or not that's something that's on your radar.
Right. Yeah. Right. So if I understood your collection, you want to see if there's any single nucleotide polymorphism studies that we will be conducting in the future and combining that with our current data.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, so we're not going to. There is a great chance that a lot of early detection in mammary cancer can be detected and is due to some single point mutation, and that is established. However, we are currently interested in just trying to understand the actual metabolism from a metabolite perspective. But Alessandra might have some thoughts on this, so I'll let her answer as well.
Can you unmute yourself, please, Ale?
Anna?
Yeah. Hear you?
And the question about the estrobolome and the polymorphism, and it's different estrogen, kind of estrogen in breast cancer, estrone, estradiol, and estrogen. In this case, I suspect I find different metabolites, and your action in morphism is different also. But it's important to investigate this topic.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I think it is.
It is indestructible.
It is indestructible.
Yeah.
My ego isn't.
My ego isn't. Hey.
Thanks.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, Sarah, you really scared me. I'm a veterinarian. I have a dog who is on raw food, of course, only game. I mean, moose, elk, deer, wild boar. And I was really scared about the thing you said about lead. We were quite aware of this because all the family hunts, and also our family is the only red meat we eat is game. And of course, we have always cut a large piece around where the shooting hole is, and we have thrown all that away. And we will continue that. But what I really wanted to say, I think lead is one thing, but then there's so many good things about game meat.
Yes.
So I
That's
think
the thing.
we could like put them in the in a scale, and say that I will continue to feed my dog every day with game, and think about the good things, about the nice amino acid consistency of the proteins,
Yes.
and the good fat.
Yeah.
And the fact that, I mean, no persons, no dogs, no animals are allergic to game meat. And when you think about salmon, salmon is nice, very nice. But I mean, the way it's grown up or brought up in Norway, they eat those kibbles that contain, well, who knows what. So that's like a very nice meat, but on the other scale, there is the way it's brought up. I don't know if I have a question. I just wanted to say this,
Yeah,
but
it's a
I'd
valid
love to hear your comment.
Yeah, it's a valid comment, but as you said, game meat has a lot of good things, and most of those dogs that we studied were healthy, so they didn't have any chronic diseases or anything. So we can't really say that it's dangerous, those levels that we saw. But anyway, since it's a really toxic metal, it just be like careful to, as you said, cut around the wound channel. And
I think here is the thing, we have a big problem, because like the hunting ethics, and the people who are often old gentlemen that have been hunting all their life, and they are there and kind of saying how to do this.
yeah,
And
they
then
might
comes a veterinarian with half a year of food hygiene in their pocket and try to make them change their mind. No,
yeah,
it's very, very difficult. I mean, we have never used gloves, and it has been always been just fine. And also that they kind of don't want to waste any meat.
yeah. I can imagine it's common that the things you cut away, you give to the dogs, maybe.
Well,
in
not
the worst
we,
case.
not we. I'd like to
Yeah.
test my dog. Maybe I send you some
Yeah.
hair and.
I actually saw a positive correlation also with lead between hair and blood. It wasn't as strong with mercury, but you could test the hair as well.
Okay, thank you.
Might be easier and cheaper.
Actually, I think could you comment on the like that you don't use lead so much anymore, or that you shouldn't when shooting?
I think you have to use bismuth now, right? Which is actually steel shot now, pretty much. Yeah. And actually, I think the legislation, certainly in the UK, is you actually to shoot game like that, you have to use steel now rather than lead.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna. Greg just said.
I think there is around duck, certainly most shoots that I know of.
Yeah.
I think in Finland, it's still just a recommendation to
Accurate.
not use lead, but I know from hunter friends that they commonly use lead still.
But if the lady's shooting her own game, then you just change the steel shot, and
Yeah,
that's your solution. You can
Yeah.
eat the metal, fine, or copper apparently, or wood or something.
Yes, plastic. So very nice questions. Any other questions, please? There's one there. Can you throw it, please, to her? Because the audience here can't hear you otherwise.
So I was just wondering if the lead is coming only from the bullets. Do you know for sure that it's coming from the bullets or somewhere else? From their feet?
well,
It's correlated to.
yeah, that's where we saw the correlation with the game meat. We didn't see any correlation between like kibble or raw food.
So basically it has to be the bullets
Yes.
hunters are using. Okay.
Yeah, I would say so.
Well, there could be, when you think about Chernobyl, for example, and reindeer, we could see things like this still. I don't know, we maybe haven't really looked at that, but So there are things that, of course, that might be coming from also from, there's not much lead in like gasoline anymore. So, I mean, there are things that could be, but what we could see is that it had to do with game, and game is something you shoot. So it's kind of our assumption, but of course there could be something that we're not seeing, that maybe they are eating more things from very close to motorways or something like that. So it could be something from food as well.
I can add that they have seen also in humans that eat game meat that they have higher lead in the blood.
Okay, thank you.
But just talk to Susan about all the very nice anti-inflammatory effects you get from the omega-3 fatty acids you get in game meat that you don't find anywhere else.
Okay, I have a question for Mr. Moore, mostly, I think. You looked at the tryptophan levels in regards to mammary tumors. And there's been some research looking at bladder cancer, which is quite common in dogs, but rare in cats. And the main difference is that they do not have any tryptophan in their urine.
Right.
Do you have any comment?
Well, yeah, tryptophan metabolism in cats is really strange. It's as far as I've understood, I don't know much about the metabolism of how cats and dogs differentiate between, like differ in tryptophan metabolism enough to be able. Could you repeat your question?
Okay, there's been some research that looked at the difference in dogs and cats with
Yeah.
bladder cancer. It's quite common in dogs and rare in cats.
Do you say splenic cancer?
No, bladder.
Bladder cancer.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay.
So the main difference they looked at was that feline urine has almost no
Yeah.
tryptophan in it, and they rarely have any bladder cancer.
Right. Yeah, no, that is really interesting. One thing that we have seen is that the tryptophan amount is very different depending on what kind of cancer. And so, and that has to do with the type of tissue that is involved. The other thing that one can say is that, you know, I do not know enough about this topic to be able to safely answer this question. So I plead ignorance. I'm sorry.
But a very interesting question. So maybe we'll look into that
Yeah, thank you for the
next
question, though. I
year, at
appreciate it.
least. Maybe tomorrow, if Robin is not going to study doing something else all night, he'll sit there and read up on tryptophan on cats. Yes. Okay. We will look at some questions from the chat. You maybe.
Oh, okay. Well, I can maybe address the nutraceutical that was found beneficial. Okay, so I didn't have time to go into all of the variables and cofactors and things that were controlled for in the study. And one of those things, of course, was supplements. And it was definitely noted that a lot of the dogs ate supplements, and the major we grouped those into oils, vitamins, and then joint medications. So we're talking about chondroitin sulfate, etc. And so that was controlled for in the study, and we didn't see any for one, we didn't measure omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids in this study, and we also didn't measure the actual content of the actual nutraceutical. So we controlled for that, but we weren't able to see any major differences in. And it's also important to note that this in the study that we were looking at lifetime diets, and a lot of dog owners reported that they used nutraceuticals in a cure type, or like in the, well, how could I say, in a treatment? Yes. So basically, like in a cyclical treatment period, or for like a short window of time within the whole dog's life. And that was also taken into account. So yeah, so we were actually interested in nutraceutical amounts. That actually became relevant in the time period 6 months prior to sampling. So it was assumed that, you know, if a nutraceutical wasn't consumed 6 months prior to the sampling, that it would be as pretty much as if you know, there wasn't any nutraceutical. I hope that answers your question. Oh, and then we actually have a question for Connor. So maybe I can ask, I can read up the question. Pirja is asking, I would like to hear from Connor if there is any evidence to the efficacy of detoxes.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that as well until Dr. Clark directed me to a book by Neil Nathan called Detox. And I strongly recommend you read that. Or Toxic. There you go. It's called Toxic. I did read the first quarter of it. Painfully boring, the rest of it, but it's very biochemical. But the first quarter, the first third of Toxic is brilliant. I got it on audio. And he goes into a lot of detail using algae like spirulina, chlorella, different clays, bentonite clay, morolite, which is kind of the same thing, green clay. And he even tells you exactly which ones do what. The guy is obsessed with mycotoxin loading. And he says that once they're in there, these black people growing up in damp apartments with black spores, once they're in you, they don't come out and they cause terrible amounts of inflammation, and you won't fix the issue until you remove you know, the heavy metal or the mycotoxin. And he tells you which ones to use depending on which mold you're exposed to. It's really, really interesting. So there's definitely evidence to it. You take these things, they absorb the baddies, you take them over the course of weeks. And there is a process, and they measure before and after, and they can prove that it works. And so there's definitely something to it. I think Matthew Murr behind me probably knows a lot more about it as well. And probably Brent, probably everybody knows more about it than I do. But I'm now convinced there definitely is a detox thing. I mean, if you thought you were exposed to heavy metals, they have to come out, and you can get them out. But I'm not somebody that knows much more than that.
I actually don't know so much about it, but one thing that I use for my patients, even more when I was in normal practice and doing a lot of patients all the time, was using something that is really cool nowadays, which is called intermittent fasting. So everybody, like human beings, it's kind of a cool thing that people do. For dogs, it means that instead of giving them food twice a day, please give them only once a day, because that gives them 23 hours to cool down their system. So when I change a diet for a dog, usually, of course, to raw food from a kibble food, I will have them 3 days on a fast, and tell the owners that go out and see the restaurants in your neighborhood, because that's the biggest problem, is that people hate to sit and eat beside their dog who is drooling and wants to have food, and they should be on a 3 days fast. But after a 3 days fast, it's really easy then to go over to giving them food only once a day. And so this is something that now is really popular in human being. And I think it's an excellent way of detoxing, is the 3 day fast, and then detoxing every day by just giving them food only once a day.
Anna?
Yeah.
About the question, the tryptophan, I would like to answer.
Yes, please.
The tryptophan metabolism in cats is different. In general, in these species, tryptophan is converting to serotonin, but in cats not. It's converting vitamin B3. It's important immune system, and the answer, for example, cats submitted to chemotherapy. And I believe it's different answer, the dogs and cats in relationship tryptophan, but in cats is more special because the tryptophan, the levels the tryptophan is get about diet. Then modulated the diet is very important in cat with breast cancer. And I believe, I suspect the different answer by tryptophan in cats and dogs. Do you understand me?
Yes,
you,
thank you. Do you want to comment on that still, Robin?
Uh,
No.
well, I have a funny story.
Okay, please.
Our group started the study, carry out the blood, urine, and tumor in cats. And I believe soon we want the most best answer about this.
So next year we will all know.
Yeah.
Super. Could you please get the mic?
Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's one more question.
So I kind of want to segue with the detoxification question to Sarah and talk about, or maybe a discussion for multiple people about, you found that there seemed to be a bigger problem with the kibble, with the heavy metal contamination, and what your thoughts were, if that was like a bioaccumulation issue with how kibble's like concentrated into meat meals and that sort of thing. But if that's the case, that the high carb content food was where the heavy metals accumulated, and then consequently in the dogs that ate them, whether or not there's a liver detoxification pathway involved, that high carb feeding affects how the liver would normally biotransform and get rid of a lot of these toxins from the body, because things like arsenic, etc., are in a lot of foods, or cadmium in lettuce is apparently a source of cadmium, that it depends on the form as to how it actually gets absorbed into tissues. So whether or not you have a thought about why kibble, like the kibble-fed dogs, had higher amounts of the arsenic and mercury, when looking at like the ocean fish kibble, for example, I think it was for the mercury. And then, yeah, if any of you think that that the liver function is affected by high carb feeding, because certainly in Australia, Claire Middle, who's a massive proponent of raw feeding in Australia, she talks about that once the total carbs, soluble carbs go above 5%, above the sort of rate of normal hepatic gluconeogenesis, that it affects how the liver might be detoxifying chemicals that are coming through. So any ideas on this area?
Good question. Well, when we looked at the fish and the mercury in the kibble, my thought was at least that it was the type of fish that was the problem. But of course, that could also be one thing, that the liver is affected, so it accumulates faster, maybe. It's a good point.
I could maybe add on to that, because I dabble with liver function, and I just I think that it's important to note that in a high carbohydrate setting, what the case, unless the dog is starving, a lot of those carbohydrates are going to immediately be converted into white adipose tissue, and white adipose tissue is the place in the body where toxic metals are stored as a result. So what I would expect in a like high carbohydrate setting, where the dog is eating more or hypercalorically, is that the toxic metal itself would also exit the blood system relatively quickly and enter the adipose tissue. What that also means that in a detox, it's interesting. There's if you read a little bit about like intermittent fasting, for example, there's this big sort of like asterisk that you have to add, that you might actually start feeling a lot worse in a situation where you're fasting for extended periods of time, just simply because the white adipose tissue that is storing a lot of these toxic elements are finally released. In a setting where you are eating a raw food diet, or if you're eating negligible or no carbohydrates, this type of mechanism and balance really isn't observed at all. So I mean, I'm just highlighting that if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet, this type of like effect of detoxifying or of a release of toxic metals is completely different. So it is very contextual.
And I just put up a slide here that is from one of our Johanna's paper, if I remember, and Stella's. So when you are eating a lot of carbohydrates and very kind of easy carbohydrates, what happens is that you have a lot of kind of the metabolism is working really hard on your liver. And compared to this, when you see the ones that are significantly decreased when you change over from a dry food to a raw food, compared to this other one where we changed over from whatever food to dry food. So here you can see that everything that is like bilirubin, alkylase, phosphatase, things that have to do with liver function, they really increase in the dry foods, whereas they go down in the raw food. So these are, and there also you actually see in both of these, you see the fat values. So both like fat, kidney, and liver values actually are increasingly getting better, either higher or lower, just depending on a bit what you want to see. So just this, of course, that you are working up that organ is probably going to have a lot of things to do, like with both the trace elements and the heavy metals as well, because you have a kind of a totally overstressed organ here.
Yeah, I mean, it has a lot to do with the quality of the liver itself. I mean, if you're talking about visceral versus, that's also a factor. If it's a fatty liver, that's going to be accumulating fat, toxins within the fat of the liver as well, and that's
copper
actually
within the triad as well.
Yeah.
Carbs.
right, yeah.
Thank you. And just on that slide that you showed with the ALT, I'm curious because I've seen that investigating a couple of pre and post blood results from feeding trials where the ALT halved in the dogs after a feeding trial on a raw diet. But it was still within the normal range. So functionally, I would have said that that was an improvement, but not sure on here where you're saying that they get better. It's just within the reference interval, they've decreased, and whether that's kind of validated here or there's a good consensus that lower equals better. Because certainly if I went to my GP in Australia, they would say, if it's 30 or 70, it doesn't make any difference as long as it's within normal. Your ALT is fine. But is there a general consensus that lower is better here within the normal reference range, or not quite?
I think that this is all these things are changing very fast at the moment, because we're going into these like metabolomics and big databases are looked at. So I think that we will see a very big change in reference values being regarded as what is normal, kind of depending on both your diets and the disease kind of things that you have. And I think that this is something that we see now when we go to human conferences, that it's kind of just coming up, and it's something that they'll probably have to wait 10 more years to see in pet food or pet nutrition studies, but we're doing all we can to and that's one of the reasons that we're doing this big questionnaire, DogRisk questionnaire study now, that we want to have like totally global, because then we can also start getting really good precise data, and then target those that have very kind of extreme but very close to each other type of pathologies, and make kind of analysis. Like we said, analysis are really expensive, but like when you have a big enough database, you can really target a very specific type of memory cancer, for example, or a very specific type of epilepsy, which is maybe not even epilepsy, but they have seizures. So I think that in the long run, what we will see is that we will have a lot of the disease names are going to fall away, and we will talk more about metabolic syndromes and symptoms, mental, cognitive syndromes and symptoms, and then have very specific kind of target biological markers that will point out to what type of treatments, for example, will be good for those. But this is still a long way ahead that we will have all this. But seeing Robin working on this and Sarah working on this, the thing is that everything just takes so much time. And so we would really need to make some kind of, maybe, I don't know, all around the globe kind of initiative for kind of sending in very specific data into the databases, and then also being happy to send hair is quite easy to send, even urine is quite easy to send, and but to get really good data, we kind of have to. And I think that the aging dog, the
Dog aging project.
dog aging project in the States and the Labrador project in the States, both of them are kind of doing that on a smaller scale already, and getting kind of the things right of how to do it. So it's a learning process. So I think both of those are things that you might want to go in and see. And then we just kind of have to have even more bigger data sets so that we can use AI for this.
It's over time.
Okay, we are over time. Super. Thank you for all the questions.